Hi everyone, I'm Trish Connor Cato. Welcome to the Excel 2021 Visual Basic for Applications video course. This course is for beginning users looking to automate repetitive and recurring tasks in Microsoft Excel. VBA, as it's known, is Microsoft's programming language that is built into the Office applications. Our focus during this course is on Excel specifically. We'll start with the basics, where you'll learn the types of things you can do with VBA versus macros, as well as some key terminology which will help you in your journey. And you'll get to edit VBA code. You'll learn the importance of macro-enabled workbooks and how to save them, as well as how to modify some security settings. We'll move on to understanding the Excel object model, collections, and how to reference objects in VBA code. Once those basics are covered, you'll be ready to move on to learning about modules, what they are, and the different types of them. We'll gain on that by learning about the different types of procedures, creating procedures, and learning the scope of procedures, and also how to work with methods. You'll learn how to get VBA context-specific help from within the editor. By the end of this course, you will be equipped with the basics to start writing your own VBA code, modify macros you've recorded, and have an understanding of how VBA lends itself to creating efficiency in your daily tasks. The first of our 8 lessons is getting started. In this lesson, we have a first topic of getting started. You'll get some background information about Visual Basic for Applications. We'll record a macro in Excel, and then we'll execute or run the macro. Then we'll switch over to the Visual Basic Editor environment, and you'll get an overview of the environment so you'll feel comfortable working in it. After that, we'll edit a macro that we just recorded in Visual Basic for Applications. You'll learn about the importance of saving a macro-enabled workbook and how to do so. And you'll learn a little bit about macro security. Now, in this lesson, we will be using files that are in the video description. There are 2 different folders. There's an Excel files and a text files folder. In the Excel files folder, we're going to be using 2 files that are in the video description, and those are vehicles and vehicles 2. And both of those are just regular Excel files. They have the .xlsx extension. The other file that's listed on the slide is a file that we're going to create during this lesson, and that has a different extension. We'll talk more about that later. What you may want to do now is pause the video and make sure you grab all of the Excel files and all of the text files from the video description and place them in what will be your working directory for the course on your computer. And then you can resume the video. So on this slide, getting started, we're going to go over some background information about Visual Basic for Applications. Kind of good to know information if you're going to be working in the language. So Visual Basic, VBA, is a Microsoft programming language, and it's built into the Excel, Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, and Access applications. It's one of the many programming languages that evolved from the BASIC programming language, which was developed way back in the 1960s. VBA was first released in Excel 5 in the Office 1995 suite. Since then, it has evolved to encompass the applications mentioned here. Now, the one thing that I want you to focus on this slide is this last point. It's known as an object-oriented programming language. This means that everything within an application is an object, including the application itself. Objects have their own set of features and uses, known as properties and methods, respectively. Since VBA is an object-oriented programming language, we're going to do a deeper dive into object-oriented programming via example. And we'll be using an example from Excel. So an Excel application is an object that contains other objects: cells, worksheets, charts, pivot tables, shapes, etc. Each object has its own properties. For example, a worksheet has a name. A workbook can be opened and closed, and opening and closing a workbook are a couple of a workbook's methods. Methods are like actions that are performed on an object. You will work with objects and manipulate them via their properties and methods throughout this course. So why VBA? Well, you can use VBA to run macros automatically based on object events. You can use VBA to create user-defined functions. You can also use it to control other Office apps. Now, we're not doing any Office app integration during this course, but you can use Excel VBA to control Word objects, for example. Mostly it's used to automate recurring and repetitive tasks. So, what is the difference between writing code in VBA versus recording macros in Excel? Visual Basic for applications has virtually no limitations. So when you're recording macros, you are limited to those tasks you can perform in the Excel interface. With VBA, you can attach code to events so that it runs automatically when the event occurs. For example, activating a worksheet or opening a workbook. Visual Basic for application allows for decision making. Now you can do that in Excel. Excel has several decision making structures that you could use. The if function would be a prime example of that. But Visual Basic also has several decision making structures that ensure that code only runs when certain conditions are met. And the looping structures in Visual Basic ensure code runs multiple times based on a condition. And then, using VBA, you can create user input forms, dialog boxes, and message boxes that can be accessed from within Excel, the application. I'm in the Excel files folder from the video description, and we're going to launch Excel by opening the vehicles file. Now we're going to be using vehicle information throughout this course, and you'll learn about the information as we go. But for right now, we're going to get our ribbon set up for VBA. Now, actually, what we're getting ready to do, we'll get our ribbon set up for both VBA and recording macros, but you don't necessarily need to have this tab on the ribbon in order to access those two things. But we'll start with adding the developer tab to the ribbon. So I'm going to just go up to any ribbon tab and right click on it. And I'm going to choose Customize the Ribbon. On the right side of the Excel Options dialog box, you're going to put a check mark in front of Developer. And then at the bottom, you're going to click OK. Now I'm going to click on the Developer tab of the ribbon. And the first group, the code group, we will be using during the course sometimes. Like I said, you can access Visual Basic and you can access your macros and record them from the code group on the developer tab. But there are other ways that you can do it without having the developer tab, and we will cover those later in the course. So now we're going to get started by recording a macro that will add a header row to our data and make the row both bolded and centered. We'll also apply the accounting number format to column G, and then we're going to auto fit the width of columns A through H. In that code group on the developer tab, we're going to click on record macro. Now, once we click OK on this dialog box, and we're not ready to do that yet, everything we do until we tell it to stop recording is going to be recorded. So let me tell you a little bit about the rules surrounding macro names. They must begin with a letter, they can be alphanumeric, and they can contain the underscore character. That's it. No spaces or any other special characters. So what I normally do, I don't use the underscore character. I'm going to type capital A, add, and then capital F, formatting. So it's all mushed together, one word, initial capital letters. And that will align with the macro naming rules. Now, as you'll see in the record macro dialog box, you can assign a shortcut key to your macro. We're not going to do that. And it defaults to storing the macro in this workbook. So it's only in this vehicle's Excel file. Now, if you do the drop down there, you could also store it in your personal macro workbook, which will open every time you open any Excel workbook. It usually opens hidden. And so if you store a macro in there, it's available to any Excel file, new or existing, that you're working in. Your other choice here is new workbook. Now we're going to store it in this workbook, and you'll see how another Excel file can still get access to it a little bit later. So we're going to leave it on this workbook. In the description box, you want to describe what the macro is going to do. So we're going to type add column headers, comma, bold and centered, period, and then apply accounting format to column G, period, auto fit columns A, and I'm just going to type the dash instead of through, and then H, period. Now we're going to click OK. So I just want to point out on the developer tab in the code group, the record macro button now says stop recording. And when we're done with our macro steps, we'll click that button. So what we're going to do, the first thing we're going to do is insert a row above row 1. So I'm going to just right click on the row 1 header and choose insert. And then I'm going to click in cell A1. This is going to become our header row. So in cell A1, in all caps, we're going to type VIN for vehicle identification number. And I'm going to just use my tab key to go to cell B1. Don't worry about column width or anything right now. In B1, we're going to type year, and this is not in all caps, just proper case. Tab over to C1, and we have make, tab, model. The next column, column E, is classification. And then we have color. The next one is dealer cost, and I'm doing 2 separate words there. And then in column H, I'm going to type in all caps MSRP for manufacturer's suggested retail price. Now we're not quite done, so we have our headings in. Now I'm going to click on row header 1, and I'm going to go to the Home tab of the ribbon. In the font group, I'm going to click B for bold. And in the alignment group, I'm going to click the center alignment button. So we bolded and centered our headings. Now I'm going to click on column heading G. And on the Home tab in the number group, I'm going to click the $ for the accounting number format. And lastly, I'm going to click and drag column headings A through H. And in the Home tab over to the right in the cells group, I'm going to click the format drop down and choose auto fit column width. Now we're basically done with our steps. What I like to do is just click on any random blank cell on your spreadsheet, then go back to the Developer tab and click Stop Recording. Because you're performing the steps on your data, when you're recording a macro, you really can't undo the effects of a macro. Now, there's a workaround for that you'll learn later. So here on this inventory sheet where we performed the steps while we were recording, I'm going to try to do Control Z, which is undo. So you click on the sheet somewhere. And the only thing it undid is the auto fit. So I'm going to do Control Y to redo that. And again, there's a workaround how to undo the entire effect of a macro that you'll see a little bit later. For right now, we want to test our macro on a different sheet. So let's go down to Sheet 2, to our Sheet 2 tab. And you could be anywhere on this sheet. And on the Developer tab in that code group, you're going to click on the Macros button. And you'll see your macro, your Add Formatting macro there. It's the only one. It's already selected. On the right side, you can click the Run button. And you will see that your macro is working as designed. You can get the efficiency benefits of recording a macro from what we just did. We recorded it on the inventory sheet, and we were able to run it on another sheet. And let's say you had like 40 sheets in this workbook. You could literally select multiple sheets at the same time. Like if I had sheet 2 and I hold down my shift key and click on sheet 3. So if you had 40 sheets, you click on sheet 2, hold down shift, click on sheet 40, and then you could just run the macro once and it will run on all of the selected sheets. So it is an efficiency tool that's built in. But now we want to go see the code that was generated while we recorded our macro, Visual Basic for Applications. So on the Developer tab, you're going to click the first button in the code group, Visual Basic. And Visual Basic for Applications opens in its own window. So I'm going to just maximize that window on my screen. Visual Basic does not have a ribbon interface. So it has a title bar like every other Microsoft application. But underneath it, it has a menu bar. And then underneath that, it has several different toolbars that can be displayed. On the left side, you have two open windows. You have your Project Explorer window and your Properties window beneath it. And you can maximize the side of the Properties window. There's a divider bar between the two. If you don't have those two windows, you can go to the View menu and you'll see that you have Project Explorer that you could click on and Properties window that you can click on to make them open up. In your Project Explorer window, you will have a separate project for each Excel file that we have open. You'll also get projects for some add-ins that you may have. So you may not have everything in your Project Explorer that I have in mine. So Solver is an add-in, and so I have a Solver project. I have two VBA projects, and the one that we're interested in is the one that's already expanded, vehicles.xlsx. If we had another Excel file open, there would be a project in the Project Explorer window for it. And then in your vehicles project, you'll notice you have a modules folder. When you record a macro, it puts your code in a module. So if you click the plus sign to expand that modules folder, it puts it in a module called Module 1. Now, if we were to go back over to Excel and record another macro, it would also be in Module 1. If we were to close Excel and then reopen the file and record another macro, it would create a Module 2. Double-click Module 1, and the module window opens in the middle of your screen, and you're seeing the code that was generated while you were recording the macro. Before we review and edit our code, I want to go over some Visual Basic Editor settings with you. So we're going to go to the Tools menu, and we're going to choose Options. So some of these editor options, notice there's 4 tabs at the top. We're on the Editor tab. Some of these editor options are default options. You're not going to know what it means right now, but we want to make sure what's checked here is require variable declaration. We'll need that later in the course and throughout the course. And then we're going to go to the Editor Format tab at the top. And this is where you'll see I set my font size in here to 18. You can change the font. You can change your code colors, all of that. I typically just change the font size so that it's easier for me to see it. And we'll come back into options later to review some other options that are going to be important for us. So we can click OK in there. And now we're going to do some minor edits to our code. So right now we're going to ignore this option explicit statement. You'll learn about that later. That's there because of that require variable declaration checkbox. And if it's not at the top of your screen right now, that's fine. It will be there when we create another module. So what it does when we're recording a macro, it creates what's called a sub procedure. Notice that the word sub is in blue text, as same as option explicit. Those are Visual Basic keywords, so they're used for a specific thing within this program. And then it has the name, what we named our macro, add formatting, and it gives it an open and closing parentheses at the end. You'll learn about function procedures later, and you have to put parameters in the parentheses, but we don't need that. If we had typed this ourselves, we wouldn't have done anything in the parentheses, but they need to be there. And then everything that's preceded with a green apostrophe is a comment line. When you run code, comment lines don't execute. They don't run. They're there to describe the intent of the code. So even when you're coding from scratch, you should put in comments. If you're coding from scratch and you type an apostrophe and then type the rest of the line, when you press enter, it will turn green and it knows that it's a comment. So one of the cleanup things we can do, because we recorded a macro, it generated unnecessary comment lines. So we have a blank one right under sub. I'm going to get rid of that comment. And then we have 2 blank ones after the comment. I'm having some selection problems here, so I'll get rid of those differently. And typically we want a blank line in between the name of the sub procedure and the comment line. So I'm going to click after the open and closing parenthesis and press enter. So this first line of code is where we selected row 1. And then we did an insert, right? And it shifted everything else down. So we got the blank row above row 1. It sometimes generates extra code, as you'll see in a few minutes, that aren't really necessary, but when you're recording a macro, it's generated. And then we clicked in cell A1. That's range, and in parentheses and double quotes, A1 dot select. So click in cell A1 is selecting it. And then we're telling it what to put in that cell using active cell dot formula R1C1. Now don't worry about that. If we were typing this code, we wouldn't necessarily put it in, and you'll see that later in the course. We don't have to use that to put it in. So it equals then, which is what we typed in that cell. And then we went all the way through cell H1 to populate it with MSRP. After that, we selected row 1. And there's selection.font.bold equals true. So in the background, selection.font.bold equals false until you make something bold, and then it switches the false to true. So that line is there because we switched it to true. And then you have what's known as a end with block. And you'll learn more about this later. It helps make your code more concise. But what's showing in this block, everything that begins with a period, this is pretty much everything that's in the paragraph group on the Home tab in Excel. If we didn't select center alignment, that end with block wouldn't be there because we didn't select anything from the paragraph group. But since we did, everything in here except the first dot horizontal alignment, all the rest of the lines are the default settings. So cells are not being merged, right? Nothing's being indented. Wrap text is not turned on. And what we did is we changed the horizontal alignment from left to center. So it is known as a constant, XL constant. So XL center is what it switched that to. Prior, it would have been XL left until we clicked on the center button. So then underneath that end with statement, we have where we selected column G. Even though we chose accounting, Visual Basic reads it as currency. And then we selected columns A through H, and we did the columns auto fit. And then after that, we clicked on any blank cell. So you'll have range, whatever, select at the end, right above the end sub statement. So a sub procedure starts with sub and ends with end sub. And you'll learn that throughout the course because we'll be creating our own from scratch after a while. So now we're going to make some minor edits to our code. So we formatted column G with the accounting number format, and we need to format column H the same way. So we want the line underneath the end with statement, the one that says columns G:(G select, change that second G to an H. And then it will apply that format to both columns with a slight change, as you'll see. The next thing is we want to get rid of some extraneous lines of code that we don't need. So we're going to select in that end with block, we're going to select everything from wrap text down to merge cells, and you're just going to press delete on your keyboard. We don't really need those lines. In the range select line, the last line before end sub, change whatever cell address is inside the double quotes to A1. So every time the macro is run, after it's finished, it will be in cell A1. And now at the top, we're just going to make a slight change in our second comment line where it says apply accounting format to column G. We're going to change the word column to columns. Notice now, once you make that change, the line is no longer green, but it'll turn green again in a moment. We're going to click after the G and type and H. and then just click away from that line, and because it's preceded by the apostrophe already, it will turn it green. So now we're going to use the Properties window on the lower left to change a few things. The first thing we want to do is change the name of Module 1. It's too generic. So in your Project Explorer window, just make sure Module 1 is selected. And then if you look down at the Properties window, a module only has one property, and that's the name property. In the Properties window, we're going to double-click Module 1. And we're going to type lowercase MOD. So that is a prefix that's used in Visual Basic to identify a module. So we're going to use the prefix MOD, and then we're going to do a capital F and finish typing the word first. So it's lowercase MOD, capital F, and then the rest of the word first is lowercase. And we're going to press enter. And when we press enter, if you look back up in the Project Explorer window, you'll see the new name. The other thing we're going to do in here is we want to change the name of Sheet 3. So in Project Explorer, in our open VBA project for vehicles, the Microsoft Excel Objects folder is already open. And you have Sheet 1, which was already named Inventory when we accessed the file. You have Sheet 2 and Sheet 3. Anything that's in parentheses is whatever you want to name a sheet. The system will always think of them as Sheet 1, Sheet 2, Sheet 3. So we want to rename Sheet 3. We're going to click on Sheet 3. And then in the Properties window, you'll notice at the top it says Sheet 3. It's a worksheet. And we're looking at the properties in alphabetical order, except you have two name properties here. The name property at the top that's not in alphabetical order is the system name for the sheet. The name property that is in alphabetical order is the one that you change to whatever you want the sheet name to be. So for that second name property, we're going to double click Sheet 3. And we're going to type new space vehicles and press enter. And now if you look up in Project Explorer, it still says Sheet 3, but in parentheses is the new vehicles. So before we save, I want us to add a few icons to the toolbar at the top. So I'm going to just right click in a blank area where the toolbars are, like so to the right of that question mark up there. And I'm going to choose Customize. On the left side, under Categories, and I should stop and say at the top you have 3 tabs, Toolbars, Commands, and Options. You should already be on the Commands tab. On the left side under the Categories, we're going to select Edit. And on the right side under Commands, we're going to scroll down and we'll see 2 commands, comment block and uncomment block. I'm going to click and hold on comment block and drag it up, and I'm going to drop it right after the question mark on the toolbar. And then I'm going to grab uncomment block and drag it to the right of comment block. And we're going to do one more command, and then we'll talk about what they'll do for us throughout the course. On the left side of the Customize box, we're going to click on Debug, and the first command is Compile Project. I'm going to actually drag that one and drop it after the question mark. So it's the first one of the 3 that we've added up there. And then I'm going to do Close. So let me tell you about Compile Project. If you want to check all of your code and any modules that you have for any errors, you can compile the project, and it will let you know if your code is okay. So let's start by clicking on that one, Compile VBA Project. We didn't get any errors, so everything is good with our code. Now let's select our 2 comment lines. And this is just a demonstration. So we also added comment block and uncomment block. Click on uncomment block. And now if you click away from those lines, they're not green, and one of them is in red because now it doesn't know their comments and it's looking at them as if they're code, so we got an error. We're going to select those 2 lines again, and then we're going to click on comment block. So comment block can be used, and you'll see this later in this course, not just for comments, but if I want to stop lines of code from executing them, I can comment them out. And you'll see that later in the class. So now we're ready to save our file. We can use the save icon on the toolbar. Control S will work in here as well. You can go to the file menu and save. Go ahead and save. Either way you chose, you're going to get this dialog box that pops up. Message box, I should say. So it says, the following features cannot be saved in macro-free workbooks, VB projects, so any Visual Basic projects. To save a file with these features, click No, and then choose a macro-enabled file type in the file type list. To continue saving as a macro-free workbook, click Yes. You do not want to click Yes here. If you click Yes, it's not going to save your macro. So we're going to go ahead and click No. And we get the Save As dialog box. We're going to not change the file name, but right underneath the file name where it says Save As Type, click on Excel Workbook. And the second one on the list is Excel Macro Enabled Workbook. It has to be saved as a macro enabled in order for it to keep your macro. And so I'm putting it in the same directory as my files for video description Excel files folder. And I'm going to choose Save. You might get this pop-up about personal information. Just click OK on it. And now if you look up at the top at your title bar, it has a different extension. So Excel workbooks are .xlsx. A macro-enabled workbook is .xlsm, as shown there. And now we're going to test our macro again, and we're going to do it twice. We made some changes to it. We want to see that those changes actually worked. So the first thing we need to do is switch back to Excel. So the first button on the toolbar looks like the Excel icon. You can click that. It switches you back over to Excel, and it still has your file open where you were before. It also still has the Visual Basic Editor file open, window open as well. So earlier I told you that if you saved your file in the personal macro workbook, that workbook would be open but hidden regardless of what Excel file you're in. And therefore you can use a macro that you recorded in any file in any other file. Well, we recorded the macro in this file, and now we're going to open it we're going to test it in a different file. So if the file which you recorded the macro in is open, and you open another file, you'll still have access to that macro. I'm going to do Control O, and it took me directly into my working directory. And by the way, if you look in here, you have 2 vehicles files now, one of which is a macro enabled worksheet, which is the one we're in, and then the other one is our original one. So when we saved it as macro enabled, it was a save as operation. We're going to open the vehicles 2 Excel file. And we're going to do another way of getting into the macro dialog box is doing Alt F8. And because the macro doesn't reside in this vehicles 2 file, it's prefixed with the name of the file. So if you look at the bottom, macros in all open workbooks are showing. So if you don't use the personal macro workbook and you want to use a macro that's in another workbook, just make sure it's open. On the right side, we're going to click Run. And you can see that our changes to our macro took place. It ended up in cell A1. Column H is formatted. And we're going to close this file without saving the changes. So I'm going to do Control W, which is the close file command, and I'm going to choose Don't Save. And we're back in our macro enabled file. Now, I want to show you the workaround that I told you about when we talked about you can't undo the effects of a macro. So we updated our macro, we formatted column H, and we want that to happen on this sheet, the inventory sheet. So on the inventory sheet, I'm going to do Alt F8, and I'm going to run the add formatting macro again. So what did it do? It added an extra row because when we recorded it, we started by inserting another row. So the workaround I mentioned earlier is you can't undo the effects of a macro, but you can run it again. And then you have to just do some cleanup work. So here I'm going to just right click on row 1 and delete it. And go to sheet 2. And we can right click on the sheet 2 tab and delete that sheet and confirm the deletion. And you can go back to your inventory sheet. So that we can talk about some security settings for macros, go ahead and close your vehicle's macro enabled file and reopen it. When you reopen it, you'll get a security notice. It could be in different forms. You could have a yellow band underneath your ribbon that pops up, or a dialog box like I have. And it's letting you know that it's saying Office has identified a potential security concern. And it gives you the path to your macro-enabled workbook, right? Underneath that, it tells you macros have been disabled. Macros might contain viruses or other security hazards. Do not enable this content unless you trust the source of this file. So the thing is, this is the default security setting for macros in Excel. And the setting is actually macros are disabled with notification. This is the notification. So it used to be that, and it still is somewhat to this day, but a lot of viruses used to be delivered via macro. So you'd receive a file from somebody, you open the file, the macro is set to launch when the file opens, it releases the virus on your system. So Microsoft put this in for your own security. If you receive a file and you get this message and you don't know who the file is from, never enable your macros. We know that we made this a macro enabled file, so we're going to click on Enable Macros. And if you had that yellow band on your underneath your ribbon, it would be on the right side of the band. You could click Enable Macros. So if you're working on this file back and forth for multiple days, recording macros or putting code in here, you don't want to have to go through that Enable Macros thing. If you know it's from a trusted source. So we're going to go and look at the Trust Center settings and make a modification. So we're going to go to the File tab of the ribbon, and all the way at the bottom on the left, you're going to click on Options. On the bottom left of the Excel options box, you're going to click on Trust Center. And then you'll see the Trust Center settings button and click that. So on the left side, if you click on macro settings, you'll see that default disable VBA macros with notification. And I would suggest you not changing that. What we're going to do is we're going to set up what's known as a trusted location. You have other choices. So you can either set up trusted documents, which you'd have to do for each document that you're using, or a trusted location, which is a little bit more efficient. So on the left side, click on Trusted Locations. At the bottom, you're going to click on Add New Location. And once you do that, in the Microsoft Office Trusted Location box, you're going to click on Browse and navigate to your working directory where the vehicle's macro-enabled file is stored. And because we chose Trusted Location, it's not showing any files here. It's just showing the Excel files folder name at the bottom. And we're going to click OK. So then we're going to select subfolders of this location are also trusted. So if you develop any subfolders within that Excel files folder, they would be trusted automatically as well. In our case, all of our Excel files are in that folder, so we don't necessarily need to check it, but I just like to point that out. We're going to go ahead and click OK, and your path shows up on this list, right? That it's a trusted location. And you're going to click OK again and again. So now we're going to close this file and reopen it, and you won't get that security notice. So this time it took you right in. You don't have to worry about that. And we can go ahead and save again. In this introductory chapter, you learned that VBA is an object-oriented programming language, and it's part of the Microsoft Office suite. It is the code that is produced in the background when you're recording a macro. You learned a little bit about the advantages of VBA over recording macros, and as this course plays out, you'll learn more. We started by customizing the ribbon to add the Developer tab. And we recorded a macro in Excel that added and formatted column headings on a worksheet. After that, you toured the Visual Basic Editor environment. You were able to edit the code produced by the recorded macro. We used the Properties window to change the name of our module as well as the name of a worksheet in our workbook. In the editor, we also learned about how to change some of those settings, so including font size. We also added some icons to the toolbar in there. Ultimately, we saved a macro-enabled file. We tested our edited macro in another workbook and in the same workbook it was recorded from. And then we modified some Trust Center security settings by adding a trusted location. In order to be effective working with Visual Basic for Applications code, you're going to have to know a little bit about the Excel object model hierarchy. And so lesson 2 is about that, and it's not a hands-on lesson. It's just going to be slideshow. And the slide deck that I'm using is also in the files in the video description for your future reference. We have 4 topics in this lesson. The first topic, you're going to learn about the Excel object model hierarchy. Then you'll learn about collections, how to reference objects, and how to simplify those object references so that your code is as concise as possible. On this slide, I have the Excel object model hierarchy, 2 different views of it. So this is almost a complete hierarchy on the left side. So let's start there. The topmost level is going to be the application Excel itself. Excel is an object within Excel. Also within Excel, you can have different add-ins, you can have different windows, you can have different workbooks. All of those are objects. Within the workbook object, you can have a Visual Basic project. You can also have worksheets. Within the worksheet object, you can have comments, hyperlinks, names, like ranges, pivot tables. Anything that you can put on a worksheet is an object. Now on the right side, I have a simplified version. So starting with the application, then the workbook, then a worksheet, and then a range. In VBA, a range can be one cell or a range of cells. So after learning the basics of the hierarchy, you have to learn about collections. They're also a key concept in VBA programming. So a collection in VBA is a group of objects of the same type. A collection is also an object. This is object-oriented programming. Collections are useful when you need to work with not just one worksheet, but with a couple of them or all of them. You'll learn later that your VBA code can loop through all members of a collection and do something to each one via code. So I have a table on the right with the commonly used collections in VBA. You have the Workbooks collection, and it would be all of the currently open workbooks. So if you only have one, your Workbooks collection only contains one workbook, if you only have one file open. If you had 20 files open, your Workbooks collection would contain 20 workbook objects. You have the Worksheets collection. It's all the worksheet objects contained in a particular workbook object. So now we have 2 sheets in our vehicles macro-enabled workbook. So we have 2 worksheets in the worksheets collection. You have a charts collection. So this would only be if you have charts in your Excel file that are on their own sheet tabs. Nothing else is on the sheet but the chart. And that would be the charts collection. So it would be a collection of all those chart objects, the chart sheets, contained in a particular workbook object. A chart sheet is not part of the worksheets collection as it is not considered a worksheet. It only has the chart on it. And then you have a sheets collection. Interesting. This is a collection of all worksheet objects contained in a particular workbook object. So it sounds just like the worksheets collection. But the sheets collection contains all worksheets and all chart sheets in the workbook object. So you have worksheets collection, which is just the worksheets. You have a charts collection, which are just the chart sheets. Then you have a sheets collection, which are all the worksheets and the chart sheets. Now that we've reviewed the object hierarchy and collections, you're ready to start learning about how to reference objects. So you can work with an entire collection quite easily. However, it's most often the case that you'll need to work with a particular object in a collection. So for example, a particular worksheet. When it comes to referencing an object in a collection, you can either use its name or its index number. To reference a single object from a collection, you put the item's name or index number in parentheses after the name of the collection. And then I have 2 examples on the screen. So if you're trying to get to sheet 1, it's in the worksheets collection. And so you can type the name of the collection, worksheets, and in parentheses, in double quotes, the name of the sheet, if you're using the name. If you're using its index number, the first sheet in a workbook has an index number of 1. So the second example is referencing the collection worksheets, and in parentheses, its index number, which is not in double quotes. So 2 ways of referencing the same sheet in a workbook. When we reviewed collections, you learned that each worksheet in the worksheets collection is an object in 2 collections, worksheets and sheets. Each chart sheet is an object in 2 collections, charts and sheets. So here is another example of referring to the first sheet in a workbook. You could use the sheets collection, and by name, you could do in quotes, double quotes, sheet 1, or you could just put index number 1 in there. So you have multiple ways of referring to the same object. As you saw in the hierarchy, all Excel objects are under the application object. So the application object is Excel itself. And you access these objects by moving down the hierarchy and connecting each object with the dot operator. You can even access the value of a particular cell on a worksheet by using the range object. So you would use the range object whether it's one cell or multiple cells. And so I have some more examples of object references here. So referring to a specific workbook, starting with the top of the hierarchy, application dot workbooks collection, and in parentheses and double quotes, the name of the workbook. Notice when you're using the name, you have to have the extension in there. If you're referring to a specific worksheet in a workbook, it could be applications.workbooks, the name of the workbook in parentheses, and then we're referencing with the dot notation the worksheet by its index number. And then referring to the value of the cell, application.workbooks, file name, worksheet by index number, dot range A1 in double quotes, dot value. So the last example is known as a fully qualified reference, meaning it specifically refers to all the objects in the hierarchy from application all the way down to range, and then accessing the range's value. You don't want to have to type a fully qualified reference when you're coding. It could lead to a lot of typos, which could cause coding errors, so on and so forth. You want to be able to simplify your object references as much as possible. I've mentioned that you want your code to be as concise as possible. The thing about coding, right? It's a lot easier to write it, but you're going to spend time troubleshooting it. And when you have to troubleshoot it, if it's concise, it's a lot less to have to read and review. So in this paragraph, it has some pointers, right? VBA can assume some of the object references for you. For example, it assumes that the workbooks collection is within the application object. So that means you don't have to reference the application object. So here's the fully qualified reference, the top example here. And when VBA assumes the application object, you can just start with workbooks, right? If you only have one workbook open, it is the only one in the collection. So VBA assumes it's the active workbook, and you don't have to reference the workbooks collection. So that takes you to it assuming the workbooks object. So you can just start with worksheets. See how we're getting more concise as we go down. If the first worksheet is the active sheet in the workbook, you don't have to reference the worksheets collection, as VBA will assume it. So you can literally, if you're dealing with one open workbook, you're on the first sheet, you can just write range and then in parentheses double quote A1 dot value. It will assume application, it will assume workbooks, it will assume worksheets. And the last one is the most preferable because it's the most concise. So starting with this lesson, lesson 3, we will be hands-on for the rest of the course. Lesson 3 is understanding modules, working with sub and function procedures. So we have the topics and files that we're going to be using here. We're going to be using our macro-enabled vehicles file and another file that was in the video description named Received Vehicles, regular Excel workbook. Our first topic, we will be learning about modules. We'll move on to understanding procedures. We saw a sub procedure before that was generated by our macro code. We're going to create what's known as a standard module. We're going to create our own sub procedure. You're going to learn about calling procedures, how to create a function procedure and using the immediate window, and then how to get context-sensitive help from within the Visual Basic Editor. So when we were reviewing our macro created code earlier, it had stored it in a module called Module 1. We ended up renaming that module to Mod First. So a module is a container of sorts that stores your code. There are different types of modules. Now our code was stored in a standard module. So let's go there first. That uses the built-in application objects. Now, we'll deal with that second paragraph in under standard modules in a moment. So, standard modules use built-in application objects. Class modules store application event procedures for objects you create, and we're not covering class modules in this course. Then you have workbook and sheet modules. These store what are known as event procedures. And you'll learn what those are in just a moment. If you store regular procedures in a workbook or sheet module, they can only be accessed using a fully qualified reference. Let's go back to standard module, second paragraph. If you store event procedures in a standard module, VBA will not be able to find them. So keep your event procedures in your workbook and sheet modules. Don't put them in your standard modules. And unless you really want to be typing fully qualified references, you don't want to put stuff that should be in a standard module in a workbook and or sheet module. Lastly, we have user form modules, and they store event procedures for the user form object. So in this course, we're going to be using standard, workbook and sheet modules, and user form modules. So let's discuss the different types of procedures that are used in Visual Basic for applications. First off, a procedure tells the application what to do as it defines a specific task. So a procedure is a named group of statements that are run as a unit. They're also called blocks of code. You have sub-procedures, and we've seen an example of that. They define specific tasks. When responding to events, they can be known as event procedures. So an event procedure is like when you activate, an event is like if you activate a worksheet. That would be known as an event, and you can attach procedures to events in here. So when we look at the modules again, right? Workbook and sheet modules store event procedures. The user form module stores event procedures for the user form object. You don't store event procedures in standard modules. We also have function procedures. They return a value just like functions do in Excel. Event procedure, I broke it out from a sub-procedure, right? Because it can be any procedure that is triggered by an event. And then we have property procedures, mostly used by programmers to create and manipulate custom properties. We will not be using property procedures in this course, but we'll certainly be doing sub-function and event procedures. Since we're going to be creating procedures in this lesson, you need to know the naming conventions and rules for procedures. So rules have to be followed. Conventions are just suggestions. It would be good if everybody followed them. So your procedure names can be up to 255 characters. They're rarely that long. They can be alphanumeric, but the first character must be a letter. You cannot use spaces or any of the characters listed on the slide. And the procedure name has to be unique within a module. So you can't have two procedures with the same name in the same module. And then there are the naming conventions. Begin your procedure names with a verb. Use proper case for each word within the name. When two or more procedures are related, place the words that vary at the end. So I have some examples. Close workbook. Get new inventory. and then get selected date begin, get selected date end. 2 more slides and then we'll get hands-on again. I promise. I just want to set you up for success. And I'll be reviewing this as we're using it. So the next thing you need to learn is the scope of procedures. And that determines where the procedure may be used. So I have a table here. You have a public scope. If a procedure declaration is preceded by the keyword public, it makes the procedure accessible to all modules in the project. If you use the keyword private, this makes the procedure available only in the current module, and it can't be accessed from any other modules. And then you have undeclared. If you don't use public or private, it will default to public. And I have different ways of executing procedures here. The ones that are highlighted yellow are the ones that we're going to be using in this course, so I'll walk you through them. We've already been in the macro dialog box to run the add formatting procedure. You'll learn about these other yellow highlighted ways as we go. We'll be doing all of those. The ones that are not highlighted, when we were creating the macro, we could have assigned a shortcut key to it. You can place a button or a shape on the worksheet, or you can add a button to your ribbon in Excel. So again, the slide deck is in the video description for your future reference. And now we're ready to get hands-on. So we're going to be in our vehicles.xlsm, our macro-enabled vehicle. Before we go back over to the Visual Basic Editor and start creating our own procedures, we're going to record another macro. Let's switch to the New Vehicles Sheet tab in your Vehicles Macro-Enabled file. And I'm going to show you another way to start a macro recording without using the Developer tab. So if you look at the very bottom of your screen underneath your Sheet tabs, you'll see a status bar. And on the status bar, it's directly underneath my Inventory Sheet tab, you will see an icon that kind of looks like a spreadsheet with a play button on it or a button on it. So if you don't have that icon, the one that looks like a spreadsheet with the button on it, I'm going to show you how to get it onto your status bar. So what you're going to do is you're going to right click in a blank area of the status bar and the Customize Status Bar menu appears. You'll notice on mine I have caps lock. I have a lot of them checked. Caps lock and num lock. So if I were to press the caps lock key on my keyboard, it would say caps lock down in my status bar. My num lock is always on my keyboard, so that's why it says num lock in my status bar. The one you're looking for is macro recording. Mine is checked. If I click on it, it unchecks it. If I click it again, it will check it again. So you want to make sure you have a check mark in front of macro recording, and then you're going to click on any blank cell to get out of the status bar menu. When you hover your mouse over that icon on the status bar, it says no macros are currently recording. Click to begin recording a new macro. Go ahead and click on the button. So your record macro box comes up. We're going to name this macro Get New Vehicles, all mushed together, initial capital letters. And the description will be open another file, select and copy the data, paste the data into this file, and we'll click OK. So now I'm going to use the shortcut key Control-O for open. I'm in my working directory, and I'm going to double click the file named Received Vehicles. When it opens, I'm going to hold down my Control key and type AC. And actually, just click on a blank cell for a minute. Click anywhere within your data first. and now hold down Control and do AC. So it only selects the data, not everything on the sheet. And C is copying it. So A is select all, C is copy. And we're going to go to the View tab of the ribbon. The next to the last icon is Switch Windows. Click it and switch back over to your Vehicles file. You're going to click in cell A1 on that new Vehicles sheet, and you're going to do Control V to paste that data in there. You're going to go to the View tab in here, go back to Switch Windows, switch back to Received Vehicles, and you're going to close that file. And now you just have your Vehicles file open. And at this point, we're going to go down to our status bar. And now that Start Macro button is a stop button. And we're going to stop our recording. Oops, I kind of clicked it twice. So I stopped the recording and tried to start a new one. And go ahead and save your file. And now I'm going to use Alt F11 to switch back over to my Visual Basic Editor window. Now, I want to direct your attention over here on the left in the Project Explorer. So we had closed that file since we recorded our first add formatting macro. So when we reopened it and recorded a new macro, it put it in a different module, which it named Module 1, because we renamed the original Module 1. So it'll start that naming convention over again. We want to rename Module 1, so I'm going to select it in the Project Explorer window and go down to the Properties window and double-click the name of it. And we're going to use MOD lowercase as a prefix for a module, capital N, New, capital V, Vehicles, and press Enter. Now, this is the thing. We're not in that module right now. If we look all the way up at the title bar, the very top of the screen, we're still in the Mod First Code window. So in your Project Explorer window, we're going to double click Mod New Vehicles. And now we can see the code that was just created from the macro we just recorded. And we're going to create another sub procedure in Mod New Vehicles right underneath the Get New Vehicles sub procedure. So I'm going to click at the bottom underneath the In sub statement. I'm going to press Enter once. And there are several ways, of course, because it's Microsoft, to create a new procedure. So we're going to do it from the menu bar first. We're going to go up to the Insert menu and choose Procedure. And we get the Add Procedure dialog box. So this is where we give it the name, the type, and the scope. In the name box, we're going to type Move Cells with initial caps. The default type is Sub Procedure, which is what we want. And the default scope is Public, which means it can be accessed from any module. We're going to click OK on the right side. And so now you'll see it put the public keyword and then sub, the name of the sub procedure. We got the open and closing parentheses and the in sub statement. I'm going to just get rid of that blank line. I shouldn't have done that before. I'm going to click at the end of the closing parenthesis and press Enter twice. So now we're going to write the code that will direct it to move some cells on the spreadsheet. So, and this Visual Basic doesn't care, but you want to structure your code. So you notice in the code from the macro, the sub and in sub statements are at the margin, and then the actual code is indented. So we're going to press our Tab key. It's easier to review your code when it's arranged in a certain way. So we're going to type columns, plural, open paren, open double quote, B, close the quote, close the parens, dot, and then you're going to type select. Press enter. We only have 4 lines for this one. We're going to do selection, dot, cut, enter, columns, plural, in parentheses and double quotes, G, dot, select, enter, and then active sheet, which is one word but initial caps, dot, paste. And then you should have a blank line between active sheet dot paste and your end sub statement. So just to instill good habits, we're going to go put in a comment. So click at the end of the closing parenthesis, press enter twice, and then you're going to type an apostrophe. I usually do a space after it. You don't have to. And we're going to say selects column B, cuts the data, and paste it into column G. And if you click away from that line, it will turn green because it's a comment line. The other habit I want to get you into is compiling your project to check it for errors. So we're going to go up. We added compile VBA project to our toolbar earlier. Go ahead and click it. We don't get any messages. And when you don't have any errors or anything, it dims out that compile VBA project button. So we're good. And go ahead and save. So the comments are describing the intent of the code. You know, a lot of times people share workbooks and you can have multiple people working in Visual Basic. And so if somebody inherits a workbook from you, when they go to your code, it's best to have the explanation there. Also, a year from now, if you reference the code, you might forget what you were trying to do. So the comments are very helpful. Now, speaking of which, I would suggest you save the files from this course because you're getting really good blocks of code that you may be able to reuse at some point in the future. So you might have to update file names and stuff like that. But if you don't have to start from scratch, don't. I have a code repository for every coding language that I use. So in this code, we referenced 3 different methods. Remember, a method is like an action that's taken on an object. So we referenced the select method to select an object, in this case, columns B and column G. And then we use the cut method. So once you select something, the second line of our code says selection.cut. It's already selected. So column B, it's going to cut column B by using the cut method of the selection object. And then under columns G select, it's saying, okay, column G is selected, but it doesn't use selection there. It used active sheet and then the paste method of the active sheet object. So, yep, 4 lines of code. And we're going to go over and test the code now. So I'm going to do Alt F11 to switch over to Excel. On the new vehicles sheet, I'm going to do Alt F8 to open our macro dialog box. And you'll see that we have our add formatting, get new vehicles. Even though move cells wasn't a recorded macro, it's still code. So all your code that you do, even if you don't record a macro, will show up here. And I'm going to just double click move cells to run it. And so it did it. It selected what was in column B, it cut it, and it pasted it into column G. So now I'm just going to click in a blank cell, Control A, and delete. And I'm going to just click back in cell A1. And let's switch back over Alt F11 to the Visual Basic Editor. So now what we want to do is we want to edit our add formatting sub-procedure so that it works on the new vehicle sheet. So that sub-procedure is in Mod First. I'm going to switch to Mod First in Project Explorer by double-clicking it. And because when we bring in the new vehicles, it already has a header row, we don't want it to insert a new row here. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the first two lines where we're selecting row 1 and then we're inserting a new row. We're going to select those two lines and we're going to delete them in this add formatting procedure. Let's switch back to Mod New Vehicles and click at the very bottom underneath your in sub statement after your move cells sub procedure. We're going to compile the project because remember, compile can compile in any module. And I want to get you in the habit of doing that. Make sure you don't have any errors before you continue. And then we're going to save again. So far, we've only used the macro dialog box to execute our code or run our code. Now we're going to use another method that we talked about in the slide deck. It's called call the procedure from another sub-procedure. So underneath your move cells sub-procedure, we're going to create another sub-procedure. And this time we're not going to use the menu. We're going to just type it in. So underneath your in sub statement, we're going to type sub and then initial capital letters, get new inventory, and press enter. And a couple of things happen. When we press enter, it puts a dividing line between the previous sub procedure and the one that we're creating. Now I'm going to click in front of sub and I'm going to press enter. I like to have a space there. Again, it doesn't care. And we're going to click at the end of the closing parenthesis and press enter twice. Now we're going to start with a comment here. So we're going to do an apostrophe and a space. And we're going to say this is a calling procedure which calls other procedures. Press enter twice. So a calling procedure is what we're creating. It's a procedure that calls other procedures. So they all execute one right after the other. It's kind of like a way to bundle procedures that are related so you don't have to execute them separately. So we're going to press our tab key to get our indent there. And we're going to type get new vehicles, enter, move cells, enter, add formatting. And we want to make sure there's a blank space after add formatting and end sub, a blank line. Go ahead and compile your project and save. So we can run the sub procedure named get new inventory. And when we do that, it will run get new vehicles, then it will run move cells, then it will run add formatting. And something else, since we typed this in, we didn't type any keyword, public or private. So if you don't have a keyword in front of sub, it defaults to public. When you record a macro or you do it from the insert box, it will show the public or private keywords. But when you type it, if you don't put public, it's still public. So only the ones you create from the insert menu will have the keyword unless you type the keyword. Even the ones from the macro recordings just start with sub. It doesn't have public or private. Now you could modify it, of course, if you wanted to make it private, but we're not there yet. Let's go ahead and switch back to Excel. So I'm using Alt F11, or you could use the icon, the first icon on the toolbar. And we want to make sure we're in cell A1 on the new vehicles sheet tab. And I am going to Alt F8 to open the macro dialog box. And this time we want to double click Get New Inventory. All right. So it ran the Get Received Vehicles code, then it did the Move Cells code, and then it did the Add Formatting code. And it executes them in the order they're listed in our calling procedure. We are going to click anywhere within the data, do Control A and delete. Click on cell A1 and just do a save on your file from here. So creating the calling procedure, Get New Inventory, gave us a little bit more efficiency. We had to use the macro dialog box to run that procedure, but we didn't have to run 3 separate procedures. So we're going to make it more efficient now by creating an event procedure. So we can switch back over to Visual Basic Editor. So we talked about how event procedures are stored in workbook or sheet modules. Unless they're for a form, then they're stored in a form module. So if you look in your Project Explorer window, under Microsoft Excel Objects folder, we have the 2 sheets, Inventory and New Vehicles, and we have this workbook, and those 3 locations would be the places where we store the event procedure. So we want the event to happen on the New Vehicles sheet tab. So in Project Explorer, I'm going to double click Sheet 3, New Vehicles. And if you look up at the title bar, it lets you know that it's in the Sheet 3 code window. You're going to click underneath the option explicit statement, which we're still not going to talk about right now. And if you notice above the option explicit statement, you have a list that says general. That's known as the object list. And on the right side, you have a list that says declarations, and it's known as the procedure list. So we need to tell it the type of object that we want. So I'm going to go to that general drop down, and there's only one thing there. We're on the Sheet 3 tab. It could only be a worksheet. We're going to select that. Now, quite a few things happened. First of all, the declarations, where it said declarations on the right, where the procedure list, also known as the events list, it says selection change. That is the default procedure for a worksheet. So what it does, if you wanted to use the default, it already gave you the framework for your code. You just have to type in your code. You would never change the name of the sub-procedure. In this case, it's worksheet, which is the object, and then an underscore, and then the procedure selection change. And then it has some arguments or parameters in the parentheses. Click underneath the in sub statement. And on the right side, we're going to leave it on worksheet in the object list. On the right side, we're going to do the drop down, and we're going to select activate. So now it gave us the framework that we're going to use, and we can delete the selection change framework. Click at the end of the closing parenthesis and press enter twice. So private sub, it made it private because it's an event procedure. It's tied to this particular sheet. It shouldn't be accessed from outside of here. If I wanted to do an activate event for another worksheet, I would have to go to that sheet's code window. So it makes it private. It gave it the name of the object and the procedure. And we're going to just put in a little bit of code here. So we're going to indent, and we're simply going to type capital G, get, capital N, new inventory. So we're calling our calling procedure from within the worksheet activate event. So that means we won't have to use the macro dialog box to run that bundled procedure, right? Go ahead and compile your project. Just habit, want you to get in that habit. And save. And then we're going to switch back over to Excel. Make sure you're in cell A1 on new vehicles, and you're going to switch to your inventory sheet tab, and then you're going to switch back to your new vehicle sheet tab, which is activating it. So as soon as you activate the new vehicle sheet, it will run our calling procedure, get new inventory, which is running 3 procedures, one right after the other, and we didn't have to use the macro dialog box to make it happen. So now we're going to create a function procedure. A function procedure returns a value, and it can be accessed from within the Excel interface as well as a user-defined function. So the first thing we're going to do on the new vehicle sheet, just click anywhere in your data, do Control A and delete, click in cell A1, and then go to the inventory sheet. On the inventory sheet in cell I1, you're going to type the word status. So we're creating a new column heading here of status, and just press enter. And now we can Alt F11 over to the Visual Basic Editor window. So when you go into Visual Basic Editor, you're probably still on your Sheet 3 tab, your Sheet 3 code window. We want to go to Mod first. And so we want to get to the bottom of the Add Formatting sub-procedure. You can use a shortcut key here, Control End, to get to the bottom of that sub-procedure. Press Enter after the end sub-statement. And now we're going to type in our function procedure. It's fairly short. We will get it all typed in, and then we will review it so you can understand it. We're going to use a construct that we're going to really review heavily later in the course, but let's get started typing. So function procedures start with the word function, space, and then the name of the function procedure. And it's going to be, and here I'll scroll as far down as I can right now on my screen. It's going to be MSRP status, and MSRP is in all caps, and the first letter of status is also in a capital letter. And then we have to pass it parameters, so they go inside parentheses. I'm going to do an open parenthesis, type MSRP and a closing parenthesis, and press enter twice. When I scroll down, you'll see that it gave you the end function statement. Once you pressed enter at the end of the function line, it will give you that end function statement. So now we're going to do our tab key to indent. We'll put our comments in last. And we're going to type if, and then MSRP, which is what's in the parentheses. We're going to do a less than symbol, 20,000, no punctuation, and type the word then, and press enter and tab. Now I'm going to go up and I'm going to copy the function name, not the stuff in the parentheses though, just MSRP status. And I'm going to copy that. Where I indented under the if line, I'm going to paste, so I can do Control V there. Then I'm going to type equals, double quotes, less than 20K, close the quotes, enter. And now what you're going to do is shift tab to get back to the if margin. So we're going to type else if. It's one word, but initial capital letters, else if. We're going to type MSRP again, less than again, this time 30,000, no punctuation, then enter and tab. We're going to paste MSRP status again, equals, in double quotes, less than 30K, enter, shift tab. We're almost done with this one. Now we're going to type the else statement. So just the word else, and then paste in MSRP status again, and then equals, and in double quotes, greater than or equal to 30,000, and then close your double quotes, enter, and then you're going to type, you're not going to tab or anything, you're going to type end if. Two separate words, end if, and then enter. So compare your function to mine on the screen, and we'll review it. So this is kind of like the if function in Excel, right? So we named our function MSRP status, and we gave it a parameter of MSRP. If the MSRP, again, that's manufacturer's suggested retail price, is less than 20,000, then the MSRP status is less than 20K in text. Then we have else if. So this gives it another condition. If the MSRP is less than 30,000, then the MSRP status will be less than 30K. Then we give it an else statement. Notice it may have put a colon after else, and that's fine. The else statement says, okay, if the MSRP is not less than 20,000 or the MSRP is not less than 30,000, do this. So any other MSRPs would get greater than or equal to 30,000. And that's the text that will show in that status column on the inventory sheet. So that's how you create a function procedure. So let's go ahead and compile our project and then save. And we're going to test this two different ways. The first way we're going to test it is in a window called the immediate window within the Visual Basic Editor. Let's go to our View menu and click on Immediate Window. And it opens on the bottom of your screen. In the immediate window, we are going to type a question mark, and then we're going to paste in MSRP status. No space between the question mark and the name of our function. So question mark, MSRP status, do an open parenthesis and type in 10,000. So we're testing it by typing in random numbers here that represent the MSRP parameter. So when you create the function, and it really doesn't matter, they're used interchangeably, but when you create the function, what's in parentheses is known as a parameter. When you actually are testing it or using it, it's known as an argument. So we're using 10,000 as our argument there, and we're going to close the parenthesis. And you're going to press enter. So it shows you less than 20,000. Now, we're going to do another test in the immediate window. You're going to type the word print and a space, and then paste in your MSRP status. In parentheses, you're going to put 20,000. And so print and the question mark do exactly the same thing. I normally use the question mark because it's more concise, less for me to have to type there. But they do exactly the same thing. So when I press enter, it will give me the result, the return value of that function. We can do one more there. We'll use the question mark again, paste in MSRP status, and put in 50,000 in the parentheses, press enter, and you get your greater than or equal to 30,000. So that's one way of testing it without doing it on your spreadsheet. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just in the immediate window do Control A, delete, and then on the right side close it with the X in its upper right hand corner. And then we're going to switch over to Excel and test this on the inventory sheet. So this is really kind of cool. We created a function procedure, and let's go to the Formulas tab on the ribbon. And the first button on the Formulas tab is Insert Function. Let's go there. Here where it says or select a category, do the drop down next to most recently used. And you might have to scroll down, but you're looking for user defined. And you'll have all this weird stuff that's here. But you will see in that list MSRP status. Once you create a function procedure in Visual Basic for applications, it becomes a user-defined function in Excel, which means you can access it and use it right in the application, which we're going to do. We're going to just cancel out of here. In cell I2, you're going to type an equal sign and type MS, and your function will show on this list as well. So it's highlighted. I'm going to use my tab key, or I can click on it to get it into the cell. And then it gives me the open parentheses, and I'm going to take my mouse and I'm going to click on cell H2, and I'm going to press enter. So yes, cell H2 is less than 20,000. Now I'm going to click on that less than 20,000, and I'm going to go, you see in the lower right hand corner, there's that little notch. You're going to click on that little notch. Your mouse will look like a thin black cross when you click on it, and you're going to double click. And it will fill that column I all the way down until it runs out of data and it's performing the function. So, and I'm going to click in between columns I, column headings I and J, just to widen column I. So there you have it. Congratulations. You successfully created and tested a function procedure using Visual Basic for applications. So now we're going to switch back over to the Visual Basic editor so that I can show you how to get context-sensitive help from within the editor. So we're going to click anywhere in the word function in our MSRP status procedure, and you're going to press F1 on your keyboard. So because there's multiple libraries, we have a Visual Basic library and an Excel library, both of which have functions objects. We're going to leave it on VBA and just click Help on the right-hand side. So it opens up in a browser window, and it gives you everything you need to know about the function statement. It tells you about the scope, public, private. There's even other stuff on the list, right? Gives you all the types of arguments that you can have, any remarks. Gives you an example that you can actually copy. It gives you another example down here. All of the examples will be copied, and they're different examples for different things. So that's one way. Now, you can go ahead and close that browser window, and just because it's fun to do, click on the word sub in your add formatting procedure and press F1. So this one doesn't have a choice, right? It's just a VBA thing. It's not an Excel thing. So it went right to it. We didn't have to make a choice. And so everything you need to know about the sub statement here, right? So if you're looking through it, right, declares the name, arguments, and code that form the body of a sub procedure. in that statement, there are two links, one for arguments, one for procedure. If I click on arguments, it takes me to the glossary where I can get the description for an argument. So if you look on the left side of your screen, it lets you know where you are. We're in the Visual Basic Editor glossary right now, right? So that's where we are right now. You can use the left nav. If I go to, let's see, Office, let's go to Language Reference Overview. So this is basic conceptual topics and stuff like that. Then you have concepts that you can expand, and we can expand Visual Basic, and it gives you information there. If you expand reference, right? So this is where there's like functions there, right? Under reference, events are there, and there's all kinds of events that you can get information on. So I really think the help is very comprehensive, and you can just be on a keyword and press F1 and get to the help topic. So that is known as context-sensitive help. And you can go ahead and close the browser window. So in lesson 3, you got to learn about modules, procedures. And so just to recap what we went over the different types of modules and what type of code should be stored in them. And then we learned about the different types of procedures and where they should be stored and what types of modules. We created another standard module by recording another macro after we had closed and reopened the file, and we renamed it. Then we created a sub-procedure from the menu. You learned how to create a calling procedure, another sub-procedure, just by typing it in. Then we moved on to creating an event procedure, which made that calling procedure, and that's not on this slide, that made that calling procedure even more automated because we ran it by activating a spreadsheet. So we didn't have to use the macro dialog box. Then we moved on to creating a function procedure, which can be tested using the immediate window in the Visual Basic Editor, as well as in the Excel application because it becomes a user-defined function in Excel. Then you learned how to get context-sensitive help from the editor window. I'd like to thank everyone for watching this Excel 2021 Visual Basic for Applications video course.